Hey folks, it's Mark here with another vinyl update. It is toward the end of February of 2017, so it's been a couple of months since I last spoke to you. I think the last time was just before Christmas, and I was heading back to Dallas, my hometown, to visit family and friends, and I did just that, and that was a great time. Great to see everybody, and picked up some records while I was down there at Half Price Books, and also at a place called Josey Records, a really cool record store down there that has recently expanded to Kansas City and also the Tulsa regions. Huge record store. Went there, then came back, went to Buffalo for New Year's just to do something a little different. Buffalo, New York, so went to a few record stores there. And then have been back home ever since. Pretty much, I've done a little shopping down in Columbus, Ohio, but mostly stores around here in Cleveland and also a few things online. So going to show you a few of those. Wanted to mention also that I noticed that I surpassed the 200 mark recently in subscribers. So I thank to all of you who watch my channel and comment. I really appreciate it. I love I love buying records. I love listening to records, always have, and do enjoy showing them and sharing them with you guys. So I'm not going to say without further ado, because everybody says that, but I guess I'll say it. I already have. But without delay, let's get into some of the records I have picked up. These are all kind of mixed in now as far as where I bought them and when, but it's all been stuff right around the holidays up to now. So we'll start with OMD. Found this down in Dallas. This is the last album they did 3 years ago. It's called English Electric. Excellent, excellent album. Much like the early albums that they had done, like Architecture, Morality, and Organization. If you're into those albums, definitely check out English Electric. I had this on CD, but it was nice to find a nice version on vinyl. It was sealed and $9, and it includes a die-cut sleeve. That's always a nice little addition there. If I recall correctly, OMD's first album came out in a die-cut sleeve as well. But finding that particular original copy in die-cut is not an easy task at all. Another band out of Liverpool, OMD, are from Liverpool. This group, The Coral. This is an album they did just last year, and it's called Distance in Between. The Coral are very much a guitar-based, Beatley kind of group, but with a slight, quirky, Zappa-ish feel to them. Maybe a little bit of a Mothers of Invention vibe going on. This album's a little more psychedelic than they had previously been in the past, but really good listen. I've only given it 2 spins, but both times the second spin revealed even more than the first, so I look forward to hearing this again. The Coral. Synth duo from the 80s called The System. They had a couple of big hits with You're In My System in the early 80s, which Robert Palmer later covered. They had another hit with Don't Disturb This Groove. This catches them in 1984, their second album. The song that led me to this album was called I Just Want to Make You Feel Good, and it's great dance, funk, synth pop from the mid-1980s, The System. This album is called Experiment, their second from 1984. The Visitors, they're just called Visitors actually, and this is an album called Poet's End. This is an Edinburgh, Scotland post-punk band who did a couple of singles and some radio sessions in the late 1970s, and they've been compiled to this album. Very much akin to things like Joy Division. Jangly band out of the UK, Leeds to be exact. They're called The Lodger. I showed an album by them in an earlier video. This is their first, called Grown Ups, from 2006, I believe. Date's not on here, but I seem to recall it coming out in 2006, maybe 2007. And good jangly pop. If you like the Smiths and Bell and Sebastian, you might check out The Lodger. This is called Grown Ups. Really fun listen. Couple of albums by a jazz funk group called Shack Attack. This is called The Coolest Cuts. This is singles that they released all through the 1980s. And this, I believe, might be their second album, or if it's not their second, it's one of their earlier ones called Drivin' Hard. Shack Attack isn't for everybody. They're mostly piano-based jazz funk fusion kind of act out of the UK. If you like early Level 42, they might be more in your style. Their keyboardist, Bill Sharp, once did a record with Gary Newman called Change Your Mind, and he did an album a couple years later, Automatic. That was all during the 1980s. Here's something else staying in kind of the jazzy vein. Lonnie Liston Smith, a jazz fusion pianist, keyboard player, during the 1970s and 80s. This is a 12-inch called Space Princess, but I really bought it for the flip side, Quiet Moments, back when I worked at a smooth jazz station in the 90s and also early 2000s, that song was a staple of it. Very romantic, sultry tune, Quiet Moments. Look that up on YouTube. I know I said smooth jazz and many of you ran for the hills, but check out that album, or that song, Quiet Moments, and you'll see what I'm talking about. He had another good song that hit the dance floors in the mid-'80s called Expansions, too. Lonnie Liston Smith. Here's a group called the Honey Buzzards. They are a British act who released 2 singles in the early 1990s. And I don't know where they're from exactly, but they might be from around the Manchester area because they're on Sheer Joy Records, a label that released a lot of independent Manchester music during that time. They've been described somewhere between Velvet Underground and Stone Roses, not too far off a comparison. Typical British indie rock from the early 1990s. Thompson Twins. This is an early 12-inch by them called Animal Laugh. I quite liked it. This is back when they were, I think it was a 7 or 8 piece band. From their first couple of albums, Set and A Product Of. Very much a different proposition from the Thompson Twins you might know. They pared down to a 3-piece after the first 2 albums had come out. So this is an early one, Animal Laugh. Quite liked it. Thompson Twins. Peter Hope and Richard Kirk. Peter Hope had been in a band called The Box, a Sheffield, England-based electro-funk act, kind of industrial-esque. And Richard Kirk was one half of Cabaret Voltaire. They did this album in 1988 called Hoodoo Talk. Came out on Wax Trax. Good minimal synth with an industrial feel to it. Billy Bremner, I showed a record by him in my last video. He was 1/4 of Rockpile and did a solo album. I don't have it, so I don't actually know the name of it. But I believe this song comes from it. It's a 12-inch called When Love Goes to Sleep, and it was written by Glenn Tilbrook and Chris Difford of Squeeze, if I can get that correct. I hoped it might be a little better considering who wrote it. Didn't really care much for it. The song kind of didn't seem to go anywhere for me. But the flip side did. It was called Loud Music in Cars, which apparently was a single Billy Bremner had released on the Stiff label a few years earlier. So, good stuff. Ho Ho Cam. This is a group, I believe they're called Ho Ho Cam. See if that makes sense to you. This is a 12-inch called Don't You Know, released on Gary Newman's Numa label in the mid-1980s. And I'm looking for a year here and don't see it, but I'm assuming 85 or 86. If you like Gary Newman and his sort of more funk direction, this might be more up your speed. Ho Ho Come. Italian synth act from the late 1980s. Their name I'm going to get all wrong, so see what you can make out of this. Effetto Jewel? I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that. It's Italian. But good early minimal synth along the lines of Kraftwerk and early Human League. This is out on the Medical label. Canadian act called Spoons, very new wave. 1981 album that they released called Stick Figure Neighborhood. And I like this a lot. This reminded me a little of Talking Heads. I don't know, it kind of sounded like a hodgepodge of many good post-punk acts from the early 1980s. See what you think. Google the track Red Light. See what you think of them. I quite liked it. They got a little more slicker and poppy, I believe, as the 80s went on. So that catches them in their early days, 1981. T-Ray, I believe is how you pronounce this group. This is the project of a guy named Michael Roos, who had a more esoteric act called Michael Roos's Broken Consort. This is this more commercial act, a lot, again, using the word Talking Heads, a little bit like that. Kind of a funk-based rock, alternative rock sound. Set the Timer is this 12-inch. He did another album called Social Responsibility under the name T-Ray, and I like that a lot too. Guitar-based, kind of rhythmic pop. I love Sisters of Mercy and found this in Buffalo. It's a collection of their early BBC sessions. So it's called Good Thing, or Gimme Shelter, it's what it's called. And it does contain a version of Gimme Shelter, but one of the reasons I got it was because of a song called Good Things, which can only be found on a BBC session. They didn't record it for a specific album. The Flesh Tones, Hexbreaker. Never had a copy of this. Great mid-80s alternative rock, but with a very 60s garage rock kind of feel to it. If you like early Bangles or Rain Parade, but with more of a raucous Sam the Sham Woolly Bully kind of feel to it. Woolly Bully kind of feel, you might like Hexbreaker by Flesh Tones. Look up Right Side of a Good Thing if you want to get an idea of what they're like. Miracle Legion, introspective pop from the late 1980s, very much like REM, 80s REM if you're into that. This is an album they put out called Surprise, Surprise, Surprise during the 80s. Just looking for a year here on this, but I want to say 87 or 88, but I could be wrong. Miracle Legion. Great dub here from Joe Gibbs. This is an album called Dub Serial. It's a Joe Gibbs production. Just great, you know, dub, reggae dub, chilled out music here. If you like dub, you'll like this. Came out originally in '73, but that's a repress. Y Pants. This is recently released, actually recently reissued EP by a New York no-wave group from the early 1980s, like 81. This originally came out in 7-inch and has been just recently reissued here on 12-inch. For fans of like Rough Trade, kind of like Delta 5, if you like that kind of thing, maybe a little bit of early Gang of Four, you might like Y Pants. Check them out. The Brilliant Corners, fantastic British guitar band from the late 1980s. This is one of their last records, released in 1990, called Hooked. Found a copy of this online for a pretty good price. Kind of like the Smiths, but with trumpets. Might be a good way to describe them. Or Blue Aeroplanes, maybe. I don't know, they're kind of hard to describe. But, you know, jangly guitar pop. Andrew Poppy found a nice mint copy of this down in Josey Records in Dallas. The Beating of Wings. One of the only albums I know he ever released. This came out on the ZTT label in 1985, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, I had a friend who had this. He used to put copies, songs of this on tapes for me. The Beating of Wings, orchestral music, all done with strings, instrumental. It's only 4 cuts. So Andrew Poppy, I like the Stark sleeve as well. ZTT was always great with sleeves. I bought a Swell Maps album the last time I checked in with you guys. Well, this is the second one, Jane from Occupied Europe. Like this one a little bit better than I liked the Trip to Marineville, which is the first album. This one's got a little more of an experimental feel to it. A little bit of electronics kind of peeking their way through their sound here. Jane from Occupied Europe from Swell Maps. This is a reissue. Now, of course, I had to buy Wham! Fantastic while I was in Dallas. Jumped on the George Michael bandwagon as soon as he died. I probably would have bought it anyway because I've been getting kind of more back into this first album by Wham! I really like it. Back when I was 13, I bought this back in '83 on the strength of seeing the Young Guns Go For It video on MTV. Loved it. Bought this. Really loved this album. And then when I turned about 15 in '85, I thought it was too cool for it. So I got rid of a whole bunch of albums in 1985. Stuff that I just didn't want to be caught dead with. Well, I could care less, you know. I got over that, and I could care less. And I've always kind of wanted to have this again. It's, you know, this isn't, it's pop, you know, but this is a lot funkier than Wake Me Up Before You Go Go or Careless Whisper or any of that stuff from Make It Big. This thing's got some real bottom to it. I really dig it. The best of folk rock. This is just a 60s compilation of folk rock, kind of jangly stuff. Bunch of bands that, you know, you probably never heard of, but it's on the Get Hip label, which is based near Pittsburgh, and I love the Get Hip label. They are home to the Cynics and loads of other 60s garage throwback kind of groups. So whenever they issue something, I usually try and pick it up. It's a name I've learned to trust, Get Hip Records. Speaking of 60s, Blue Cheer finally got a copy of, let me see if I can get the Vincibus Eruptum with Summertime Blues and Out of Focus on it. Great album. I've been after this for a long time and finally found an original copy in decent shape, so I picked it up. Great proto-metal. If you don't know Blue Cheer, check out the Summertime Blues video on MTV or on YouTube. Here's a couple albums by Grapefruit. This is a band that John Lennon had once championed. They issued this very Beatlesque album in the late 60s called Around. It got issued over here in America on Dunhill. Then they switched over to, I'm trying to figure out what label they switched over to, RCA. And they released a second album called Deep Water in the early 70s, revealing more of a country rock feel to it, but still quite good. Grapefruit. If you want to know kind of their Beatlesque sound, check out Dear Delilah on YouTube by Grapefruit. You will love it. If you're into the Beatles, you'll love Dear Delilah. Rockpile, never had a copy of this. Showed the Billy Bremner record earlier. He was in this group along with Nick Lowe and who am I forgetting? Dave Edmunds and Terry Williams on drums. Terrific album by Rockpile. The only album they actually released under the name Rockpile, although all the members had played on Nick Lowe and Dave Edmunds albums from around that period in the late 1970s. Scottish group The Bluebells. Here's a non-album single they released called All I Am Is Loving You. Never had a copy of it. It's not on the album Sisters, and there was always a place in my collection for this, so I picked it up. Good Scottish guitar pop, like Aztec Camera, that kind of thing. Skids, Scared to Dance. This is their first album, Scottish group, post-punk group, Skids, featuring Stuart Adamson, who later went on to form Big Country. And this is their debut album, Scared to Dance. Never had a copy of it, so finally picked one up. I have their other 3 albums, but never had that one. And kind of been on a Michael Oldfield kick lately. Really kind of been getting into him a little bit, so I snagged a few of his albums over the holidays. This one I really liked, Incantations. This is a double album, 1 song each side, and this comes from, I believe, 1977. It's a German pressing. Really, this is probably my favorite of the bunch. Really atmospheric, beautiful music there. 5 Miles Out, an album he put out in 1982, Mike Oldfield. Hergest Ridge, this came out, I think, after Tubular Bells in 74. So he released this right after that. And then QE2, this one dates to 1980. QE2, Mike Oldfield. Just really good inventive guitar playing, very distinctive sound, and he creates a lot of nice textures and moods with his music. I've really been getting into him a lot. And sort of like him is ex-Gong guitarist Steve Hillage. Not too unlike Mike Oldfield. Creates a lot of great sonic textures on this album called Green. So he's another one I've been picking up stuff by as I see it. 3 new releases from Brian Jonestown Massacre, who I really, really like. This is their album Third World Pyramid. Great, jangly, garage style, 60s influenced guitar pop. I can't think of any other way to describe it, but I really like it. If you like Jonestown Massacre, you'll love that album. And then 2 10-inch singles he recently released. Groove is in the Heart, which is not on the album, and this song called The Sunship, which is on the album, but the B-side isn't. A few more things to show you, and then we'll wrap this up. Cleveland group called Nowhere, fantastic jangly psychedelic guitar pop. If this band had been around in the 90s, they would have been on Creation Records. Fantastic. Not too unlike Ride. Of course, the group is called Nowhere. So I'm sure they have some Ride records in their collection. This is their brand new album, their 3rd album out on the Echo Drug label. And Nowhere is the name of the band, and the album is called Invisible World. Heroin, this is a group that VC member Josh Davis had shown, and really, it just piqued my interest. They were a band out of, I think, New Zealand. I'm looking right here to confirm that, but if they're not from New Zealand, they are from Australia. But they recorded in the late 1980s, and everything from church-style jangly guitars to droney, psychedelic, Spaceman 3 weirdness. They've got everything. This is a double album compiling all of their work from the late 1980s. Cheetahs, good shoegaze band. This is one of their earlier EPs called Sands. Love it. Just loud, fuzzy shoegaze music. Fantastic. Hallucination Generation. This is a record I used to dance to in goth clubs in the late 80s, early 90s. It's called, by the Gruesome Truesome, Hallucination Generation. If you like Thrill Kill Cult or anything on Wax Tracks, you'll like this. Meat Beat Manifesto, that kind of thing. New Deutsch. This is a collection of German electro new wave from the early 1980s. Fantastic stuff. Grazone are on here. They had a hit, well, an underground hit with a song called Ice Bear. They're on here. There was one other group I knew about, Der Plan. But just very sprocket style, minimal synth from Germany from the early 1980s. And last but not least, Forge Your Own Chains. This is heavy psychedelic ballads and dirges from 68 to 74. Just good, moody, dreamy, trippy, psychedelic pop. Some of it isn't even quite so pop. So there you go. That's all of my current releases. I'm hitting this video in under 20 minutes. I'm congratulating myself. Yay! I looked at this pile and went, oh man, how are you going to get through this? So Anyway, thank you all for watching again. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to try and think of some theme videos to do. I want to do something a little different. I know some of you out there have been trying to break away from that, just showing new releases and maybe try and show, you know, something along a theme. I may just pick all-time favorite albums and show it to you. If you've got any suggestions or anything you want me to show, let me know. And I'll get cooking on another video, hopefully sooner than 2 months, okay? All right, talk to y'all soon. Bye.